Hello everyone, Mark here, Mark's Max Muscle, and I thought today we would talk about the history of bodybuilding. Now, I did a complete history of bodybuilding video quite a while ago, and it was rather long, so for today we're just going to quickly run through the entire history. So, we're not going to spend too much time on any one figure in this world of bodybuilding, and we're going to skip to this guy here. Eugene Sandow. Now, there was guys, Milo of Croton, for instance, before that, and you can, like I said, you can watch that complete history of bodybuilding video that I made, and it goes more into depth. But needless to say, Eugene Sandow was the first recognized bodybuilder, I guess you could say, for the lack of a better term, because he never competed. He just went up on stage, performed some strongman feats. But why he's so important is because he started the whole thing. He was the promoter of the very first ever bodybuilding competition. It's called The Great Competition. It's won by a guy named William Murray. You could ask somebody who won the first competition. Not too many people would know it was William Murray. But having said that, they gave away 3 Sandow statues. So 1 for each of the top 3. So the very first ever competition had the exact same trophy as they do now. Except it was a gold for first, silver for second, and bronze for third, which was very cool. I think that was very cool. And then for a long time, nothing happened. Actually, stuff did happen. There was a guy named Burnarr Macfadden, a very underrated and never talked about figure in bodybuilding. Very integral. He started promoting shows around the same time Eugene Sandow did. And he continued on until the 1920s. He was basically Joe Weider before being Joe Weider was cool. Charles Atlas, he rose to fame in the 1930s. And he wrote a little article in the back of magazines, comic books, things of that nature, and he sold the Charles Atlas course. And I guess he was the most famous bodybuilder without even competing. So in my opinion, it wasn't even the actual bodybuilders that were famous at this point in time. It was guys that made their fame in other avenues. And then we get to the 1940s. And finally, we can see some competitive bodybuilders that were the biggest names of the time, like a guy named John Grimmick. And not only did he go undefeated throughout his entire bodybuilding career from 1939 to 1949, but during the tail end of his career, he garnered a lot of popularity and a lot of attention towards bodybuilding, and right at that point, the IFBB and the NABA promotion started doing shows. And 1948 marked the very first ever Mr. Universe competition. So things were picking up. Of course, the IFBB never started doing the Universe till 1959. But having said that, you can see John Grimmick placing first here, and in second prize was Steve Reeves. Another very important man in bodybuilding for so many reasons. He always did lose to John Grimmick, but in 1950, after John retired, Steve went on to win the 1950 NABA Universe, which was the biggest bodybuilding prize at that point in time, and he defeated a guy by the name of Reg Park. And then Reeves retired and became a huge movie star. Now that put bodybuilding on the map. Not only that, but the aforementioned Reg Park, who actually did go on to win the Universe the following year, 1951, he started a huge movie career also. He played Hercules in the movies just like Steve Reeves, only he continued to compete, unlike Reeves. So he actually improved quite a bit in terms of the physique itself. But the funny thing is, he'd win the Universe, then he'd take a few years off. Guy named Bill Pearl, he was doing the same thing, and they never met on the bodybuilding stage, which was unfortunate because, in my opinion, those two dudes had the best physiques of their time. And if you look at their winning records, it's almost as if they had some sort of deal never to meet each other on the bodybuilding stage, both gentlemen, with a very prestigious competitive career. Now, at this point in time, Joe Weider saw an opportunity to make the IFBB the biggest federation in bodybuilding. Now, Bill Pearl he was getting a little older, and in 1971, he returned to reclaim his NABBA Universe title, and he welcomed all competitors. Sergio Oliva, a former Mr. Olympia champion, he won Joe Weider's title in 67, 68, and 69. He went over to compete against Bill Pearl. Not only that, but it was the face-off the bodybuilding world couldn't wait to see. Reg Park versus Bill Pearl. So you had Bill, Reg, and Sergio Oliva with no Arnold Schwarzenegger. Why did Arnold not compete? Well, Joe Weider, Arnold, I don't want you to compete for any other federation. He seemingly made it illegal, or you'd be disqualified from the IFBB if you did compete for NABBA, which was confusing because Sergio, he was there at the 71 Olympia. He was ready to compete. You can see him right up there with Arnold. But he was disqualified from actually competing because he competed at that year's Mr. Universe in the NABBA promotion. Now, ask for the 1971 Mr. Universe competition. Well, when the smoke was cleared, Bill Pearl did win, but with the absence of the Mr. Olympia champion Arnold Schwarzenegger there, I guess it took the prestige out of that title, and the window was wide open, or the door was wide open for Joe Weider to make the Mr. Olympia title and the IFBB promotion, more importantly, the biggest title, the biggest federation in bodybuilding. And after that 71 Universe, that's the way it went. As many good champions as there were in the NABBA promotion, and there was, folks, there was a lot. I mean, it just could not compete with the IFBB. And Arnold, of course, took home 6 Olympia titles, culminating with that 1975 win over there in South Africa, Pretoria, South Africa. That's where they filmed Pumping Iron. And no, Pumping Iron was not actually released in 75. I actually don't think it was put out into theaters until 1977. So Frank Zane was the reigning champion during the release of Pumping Iron, and that put bodybuilding yet again on the map, even further out into the public, because people knew what bodybuilding was all about. But after Pumping Iron, they knew what the bodybuilders themselves were all about. Now, of course, releasing this video during the reign of Frank Zane, that definitely would have helped his popularity. People were getting into bodybuilding. They wanted to know who the Mr. Olympia was. So Frank Zane, him with a leaner physique, that changed the entire look of bodybuilding. And man, did he sell a lot of magazines. Because the average Joe would look at Frank's physique and think, yeah, I could achieve that. I mean, they'd be wrong for the most part. But Frank Zane, with his lean physique, he was a very popular figure in bodybuilding. Kept those physiques trim, fit and trim through the 70s. And then it all kind of didn't fall to pieces. It hit a point, did bodybuilding. 1980. Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was already a movie star. Not a huge movie star, but he returned to the bodybuilding world, to the bodybuilding stage, to reclaim his Olympia title in 1980, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including one Mike Menzer. And I would be remiss if I didn't go through the history of bodybuilding and not mention him, or I would be remiss if I did that. I'm telling you right now, it was a big deal. Frank Zane, he also competed that year. He was the reigning champion, but he was injured, you see. He slipped by a pool, or he was probably running by a pool, and he slipped and he hurt his urethra. But having said that, Arnold, like a shark, smelled the blood in the water, and I think that's why he decided 1980 was the year. Now, Mike Menzer backstage, he threw a fit, and he attacked Arnold. He pounced. I'm not exactly sure if they came to fisticuffs, but it was a very tense situation. Arnold Schwarzenegger, when the smoke cleared, he won the 1980 Mr. Olympia event. Following year was a bit of a melee as well, with Franco Columbu, who I've yet to mention. He actually won the 76 Olympia title right after Arnold retired. He came back and won it in 1981 as well, just like Arnold. So controversy all over the place. And then we had Chris Dickerson take home the title, followed by Samir Banu. And then 1984, we hit the Lee Haney era. The Lee Haney era. I mean, this guy was incredible. He was totally awesome. He racked up 8 Mr. Olympia titles. But did he really change bodybuilding for what it was? Not really. Was he any bigger than Arnold? No, he wasn't. Condition might have been a little bit better. But my point is, bodybuilding was still a physique competition. It all would change in 1993. Dorian Yates ushered in the mass monster era. He came in 250, almost 260 pounds, just peeled, shredded to the diced in 1993 at that year's Mr. Olympia. Now, he already won the title 1 year prior, 92. You see, Lee Haney retired after winning his 8th title in 1991, so Dorian took over naturally, 1992. But in 93, he upped the ante. There was something in the gravy, definitely something that the bodybuilders were now taking, because it wasn't just Dorian Yates. It seems like the 1990s was loaded with giant-sized superstars, all with great aesthetics as well. Guys like Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler, Nasser El-Sunbody, even Paul Dillette, Jurassic Paul. Don't forget Sean Ray, and you can't mention Sean Ray without Lee Priest. I mean, Chris Cormier, the names continue. And of course, at the tail end of the 1990s, Ronnie the King Coleman. He won his very first ever Mr. Olympia title, so I guess you can count Ronnie in with the 1990s bodybuilders. But it seems like after then, we never turned back in terms of muscle size, because Ronnie himself, 2003, he changed the sport once again. He was nearly 300 pounds on stage. And this would be, arguably, the pinnacle of bodybuilding. There will never be another bodybuilder that will equal this in a lot of people's opinions. I think someday there will be. Not for a long, long time. 2006, Ronnie lost his Mr. Olympia title, placing second to Jay Cutler. But by this time, he was in his 40s, so he was well past his prime. He had nothing more to prove in bodybuilding. Jay Cutler, nowhere near as great of a champion, as good as the guy is. Great guy, Jay Cutler, but no way, shape, or form was he as great as an Olympia champion as Ronnie the King Coleman. Nor was Phil Heath, who took the title in 2011. Great champion, of course, Phil Heath. Much smaller scale than what Ronnie King Coleman brought, but the conditioning was there. He had the muscle bellies, but again, I must reiterate, nowhere near the size and substance of what Ronnie the King Coleman brought. Phil Heath, he got a little bit too big in the midsection in 2018, and this was a whole different ball game for bodybuilding. The social media, the internet, we had guys like Louis Marco calling out the midsections. You had a lot of people suggesting that, well, if this took place in the 90s, Dorian Yates would have lost his title too, and it was a whole different ball game. So Sean Roden dethroned Phil Heath, and Phil won 7 Olympia titles. That was quite the reign indeed. But it wasn't just that year. I think bodybuilding absolutely changed. Every Mr. Olympia champion since Phil Heath has had a fit, trim midsection. Brandon Curry looks fantastic. Even Big Ramy. Say what you will about his physique. I'm sure there's people that don't think he's the most aesthetically pleasing bodybuilder, but never did he have a bubble gut or an issue with his midsection. Looks pretty tight, fit, and trim to me. And that leads us to today's lineups. We have Hattie Shupin, Derek Lunsford, and Samson Dauda, now, of course, with Andrew Jack in the mix. Aside from Andrew Jack, it has been those 3 guys that have traded off the Mr. Olympia title. Of course, Hattie Shupin won it in 2022, then Derek Lunsford, 23, of course, Samson last year, and Derek Lunsford, your current Mr. Olympia champion. So that's it, guys. That is the quick little history of bodybuilding. Tried to keep this one around 15 minutes. So there was a lot of bodybuilders that I left out. Guys like Serge Nabret, Tom Platz, whole bunch of them. You could just sit there all day. Sergio Oliva, I really didn't give him much time either. Hit thumbs up on the video. Let me know in the comments section below your favorite bodybuilder or some good ones that I left out. Have a great one, folks.